We're going to continue the narrative of the book of Numbers today, and it gets quite interesting and, if not sad, in chapter 11. But before we get there, we're going to go back up for just a moment to chapter 6. We looked at a lot of details yesterday about the first 10 chapters of Numbers, just some odds and ends, but there's a beautiful benediction or a blessing that's found in chapter 6 that everybody ought to know about. It's a sweet benediction. The tabernacle is now built, and Aaron is instructed to bless the people. And this is the words that he were to bless them with, verse 24. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. What a sweet blessing and benediction upon the people of Israel. You'll find this idea of God's face shining on the people through other Old Testament passages, especially the Psalms. So this is something that meant a lot to the people of Israel. God's face shining on them, that's the approval, the blessing of God, and that is wished upon the people. So at the end of chapter 10, things are in place for worship and serving God. They've been blessed by the Lord through Aaron. And then we come to chapter 11 and so forth, and it starts to sour. Now, this becomes a cadence that is very troubling, and that is that they begin again to grumble. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now the people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of the Lord. When the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camps. And the people therefore cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died out. So we're starting now this constant complaining on the part of the people. And they're complaining here in particular over the lack of meat. We find in verse 4 that the rabble who were among them had greedy desires, and they said, "Who will give us meat to eat?" So basically what they had, verse 6, was this manna. And the manna was a blessing of God. It was a miracle. Matter of fact, this is very early in the wilderness wanderings. Just in the first year or so, and they're complaining already about the lack of meat. And they seem to have this bad memory of how wonderful things were back in Egypt. They remembered how all this wonderful stuff they used to eat in verse 5, the melons and the seeds and the leeks and all that kind of stuff. They seem to have forgotten about their bondage back in Egypt and the hardships that they had. So that's how memory works sometimes. But they're looking they're grumbling because they lack food, the kind of food that they want. Well, so that's the first set of complaints in these two chapters, chapter 11 and 12. The second set of complaints is Moses himself. Moses is now complaining to God. As these people begin to bellyache about this, that, and the other, the anger of the Lord, verse 10, was kindled, and Moses was displeased. And so he goes to the Lord. He says, "Why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight that you have laid the burden of all this people on me? Was it I who conceived this people?" So he's saying, look, it wasn't my idea to bring all this hundreds of thousands of people out in the wilderness. This is your idea, God. And you called me to do this. You kind of forced me into it. And here I am, and this burden is too much for me. So poor old Moses is feeling sorry for himself, and we get that. I mean, this is a heavy, heavy burden that he's got, and he's not happy about it. So he says in verse 14, "I am alone and not able to carry all this people because it's too burdensome for me." And he even says, verse 15, "Well, kill me at once if this is going to keep up happening." So he is really, really down. By God's grace, he gives him, however, starting in verse 16, a number of men, 70 in particular, who are going to come alongside to help Moses at this time. And so he's going to have these men to help lift up the burden that he faces. And that's going to be a big help to Moses, and he needed that very desperately. So that's part of that. Now the rest of the chapter goes on to speak about this, that, and the other, about what the Lord is doing and about these leaders. In verses 31 on down, he does send the people meat. They've been complaining about meat. He sends them meat. He forces a whole unbelievable large number of quail into camp, and they eat the quail. They're all stacked up. And yet it said in verse 33, while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and he brought a plague on them. So they got their meat, but they also got a judgment from God. Not a very pretty picture. But we are not done with the complaints. In the next chapter, we have Miriam and Aaron speaking out against Moses. And they're apparently want to have equal leadership with Moses, and they speak against him. And they say, has he not spoken to us as well? And now Moses was a very humble man, more than anyone on the earth. So Moses would not protect himself. He would protect God in his honor, but not himself. But the Lord speaks for him. And so what ends up happening is God brings a plague on Aaron and Miriam, but especially on Miriam. It says in verse 10, she becomes leprous. Perhaps she was the leader. Aaron doesn't seem to be a very strong leader. People seem to take advantage of him often. It looks like Miriam has done that here. So she is getting the blunt of the plague of God. But Moses goes to the Lord and asks him to heal her, and the Lord, after 7 days, does so. So complaint in these 2 chapters. But what happens next? Well, it doesn't get a whole lot better. We'll see tomorrow.